Back again. Here we are. Maya, not joke, huh? Walking backwards. Yep.
Yep.
Get this guy out of there. Yeah. That's exactly what you want to do.
Very, very true. Yes. Good morning, Timothy. And good
Good
morning
morning,
to
Maya.
everybody watching us. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the 265th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Squire, which is the longest-standing government relations firm here in Tokyo, and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the time when we talk about Japanese politics, what happened during the week, or how the LDP handled a lot of the events here, because there are a lot of opposition as well. But still, anyway, I want to go directly into the topics of today without holding you waiting. And Timothy, what are we going to hear from you today?
Thank you very much, Maya, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. 265 is today. It is March 8th. March is a time of real change in the weather. It's in between winter and starting to get into spring. I was all set up to broadcast from the deck of the good ship Grimm's. I'm here in Katsuyama, on the coast of the Chiba Peninsula. But it's just too cold and the wind is too strong. You never know. I mean, the wind was not supposed to be like this, but the change that's going on in the weather and the topography of everything that's going on also is a big influence on what's going on geopolitically. We are in such a state of change here in Japan, Maya. You know it. We follow it every day. And it's like this, we're in this kind of vortex that just continues to go on. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. We've got the diet that is supposed to pass the bill of the budget this Friday coming up in 5-6 days. They're supposed to pass that up in record time, 58 hours of debate. It's the shortest time for debate in history for them to pass this budget. And the prime minister has said, I want this to go to the upper house on Friday the 13th. She tried to have another session on Saturday, yesterday, and that didn't quite run well with the other members of the opposition party, although she has a supermajority. She's being very gentle about dealing with these kinds of potential controversies. But anyway, change is in the air. It's not just here. The cherry blossoms are scheduled. They've moved it up a little bit, Maya. The meteorological agency has said they will pop now on the 19th of March rather than the 23rd. Originally, it was planned for the 23rd. So as everybody knows, this is a huge season in Japan. It really kind of launches Japan into spring, and it's just a beautiful time to be here. Lots of tourists will be coming in, and it's also the day that she will be in Washington, D.C. And as you know, the tidal basin in Washington, D.C., Maya, you haven't been to Washington, D.C. yet, but I think a lot of people in our audience have. And the tidal basin is right in downtown Washington, D.C., very close to the White House. It's surrounded by cherry trees that were a gift from Japan. And these are unfortunately not going to bloom at the same date as they are set to bloom in Tokyo. They're going to bloom maybe a week after the prime minister is there, so that she won't be there at a time when it's blooming. But I think it just is somewhat happenstance or ironic that she's going to be there just as those buds are beginning to pop. Some of them, the plum trees, will obviously be popping, but this is a big deal. It's a big deal for the United States. It's a big deal for this prime minister. She goes into Washington, D.C., having pushed the budget through the lower house. She comes in looking pretty good. She's the new prime minister. It's her first visit to Washington, D.C. as prime minister. And there's a lot on the table. Mr. Akazawa, the trade minister, the economic security minister, is in Washington, D.C. He left on Thursday. He's there today planning and setting up things. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And also, there's a lot going on geopolitically with the oil and the Hormuz Strait and Japan's preparation for that. And also, there's quite a few Japanese nationals who are in Iran. There are about 200 there. They're being extricated out. But there are also lots of Japanese nationals throughout the Middle East. And the Japanese government has begun flying them out, evacuating them uh, in full force starting yesterday. So a lot of them will be coming back, and they want to just remove any potential of them being caught up in any kind of danger or anything like that. China has resumed very aggressive flights. It's been in hiatus. If you've been watching the show for the last 2 weeks, we've remarked on that China has been very quiet. It hasn't been breaching Japan's economic security zones. It has been flying by, testing the response times of the Japan Self-Defense Forces fighters or the United States, and not so much of a breach of the sea lanes as well. And that has come to a close just these last couple of days. So there is something in the air. And as I mentioned when we promoted this briefing, Maya, the change is not small. It's very big, significant changes that are going on right now. We can see that they're a precursor potentially to other things that just kind of snap into place. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit. There's an awful lot to unpack, but if you can give me about 30 minutes, 35 minutes to go through that, then let's get into a robust Q&A session that's managed by you, Maya. People who are in the audience are invited to send their questions or their comments, or to say, where I'm wrong and stupid, and, point those things out. So this is a community that is talking about what's going on in Japan that matters the most to us who are doing business here, living here, having trade relations, diplomatic relations with Japan. So I'll turn it over to you, Maya, and then we'll get right back into it.
Thank you very much to everybody watching, and everybody who will be watching later on. I hope that you're not impacted by the pollen season here in Japan, because obviously a lot of people are. And I wanted also to say that if you find these briefings informative and you think that they might be helpful to friends, colleagues, family, acquaintances, help us spread the word. Tell those people that we are doing the briefings and they are open and free of charge for everybody. And we'll be happy to see them here. Of course, there is a newsletter as well, which goes out a couple of days after the briefing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you can do that on Substack at Langley Esquire, Langley-esque. So, please do that, or let me know and I'll add you to the mailing list there. In the meantime, also remember that this month's movie night is going to be on the last Tuesday of the month, and that is March the 31st. We're going to announce the movie a little bit later, as soon as we have some clarity
Decide
about
which one it's going to be.
Indeed, yes. Okay, and with this, once again, Timothy, I'll turn it over to you so that we can hear about the latest events and, let's say, happenings here in Japanese politics. Yes.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you again, everybody. We have about maybe 5,000 people that watch this briefing every week, and we really appreciate that. Please take the time to hit like if you're enjoying this, if you're following us. Give us a little bit of encouragement. Let me start the briefing today with diplomacy. So the Prime Minister of Canada was in Japan for 2 days, Thursday and Friday, on a 3-nation trip. He's in Japan, then Australia, and then India. This is a pretty big deal for him. You're not reading too much about it in the Japanese press because, there's just so much else going on. The relationship between Japan and Canada is very strong. Canada's having a little bit of problems, with the United States currently, with that particular, the current prime minister. So there's a lot in flux over there too. Japan and Canada share a desire to have a rule-based order and to have things decided in a kind of the context of people and countries sharing opinions and making decisions collectively. And that's kind of not where we are right now. So that was one of the areas of discussion with the two prime ministers. And Japan is in a very difficult place. The United States is going pretty much alone, carving its own path, and insisting that its allies toe the line too, not be too critical, and be on standby to support and not diminish or criticize too much. Spain did the other day and got slapped down. They changed their tune really quickly. But Japan's in a difficult, not difficult. It's in a kind of interesting situation. It is the powerhouse in Asia, and as the United States begins to disengage, it wants to foist much of the responsibility on the like-minded countries, particularly Japan, in this area of the world. And so Canada and the United States and Japan have this kind of tense relationship that's going on right now. Uh, I don't know how it's going to shake out, but I think in anticipation of her meeting with President Trump on the 19th, which is in this Friday, we close the budget for the lower house, pass it to the upper house. 1 week later, Friday the next week, she's in Washington, D.C. She's there Friday, Saturday, and I believe comes back on Sunday. So although it's as close to a state visit as you can get, I think it's a rather brief visit. She has got her hands full, and as I said, she's encouraging the lower house. Please meet. We've got 58 hours. Please meet on Saturday. That's yesterday. And the opposition party said, no, we don't want to do that. I mean, you should be able to manage this with the time that we have. And in fact, why is it March 13th? Let's push it to later. And if you're not going to push it to later, what are you going to do if we don't pass it by April 1st? Don't you want to have a supplementary budget? So they're throwing, they're not even wrenches into the works. They're throwing noodles into the works because the LDP has such a power in the lower house that these comments, these suggestions they're I think designed maybe to at best embarrass the prime minister. She's got to come to Washington, D.C. looking strong. I mean, stronger than the last three prime ministers in their trips. And I mean, compared to what Ishiba did geopolitically and internationally, I mean, she's a rising star, and she wants to go there nice and clean and looking good and integrated, and having the lower house tumble a little bit or having a little bit of dissension there. She just doesn't want it. So she's being, I think, very delicate and diplomatic in handling that. But his visit reflects the Canadian Prime Minister, his visit, an increasingly important trend with the middle powers coordinating more closely as the global order becomes more uncertain. So this includes global energy security, supply chains, defense cooperation, and that's the kind of core of the discussion they had this last time. Akazawa is the economic minister. He is in Washington, D.C. He left 3 days ago, laying the groundwork for the prime minister to have a knockout visit in Washington, D.C. His mission, as I think we all understand, is mostly focused on the $550 billion commitment that Japan made to invest in the United States, and the projects that are going to be pursued by Japan, paid by Japan mostly. $550 billion is the plan over a 5-year span. It's mostly energy cooperation, advanced manufacturing, supply chains, and port infrastructure. 3 of those deals have already been cut. And I think we can anticipate when the prime minister meets with Trump in 2 Fridays, a lot of announcements, a lot of things, a lot of energy going into that. And I think the design here, in my mind, is to have her come back to Japan with a bit of a hero wreath on her head, having gone to Washington, D.C. and been in the den of the lion and come back victorious. I think that's the plan. The 19th, and then she's got less than 10 days, well, a little bit more than 10 days to pass the budget in the upper house. And as you know, the LDP has a supermajority in the lower house. It doesn't have a supermajority in the upper house. So that's why the several committees that are being launched by the prime minister are designed to include Ishin no Kai. And so Ishin is the Osaka-based party that has about 40 members in the Diet. They are not that strong in the upper house, but they do complement the lower house supermajority. But the LDP doesn't need them. So a lot of the promises, the 10 promises that the LDP made before uh, the start of this new diet and before this the election, those are some of them are kind of falling by the wayside. Um, but it's the LDP and Ishin and the Democratic Party for the People has not fully come in. But this last week there was some movement. Mr. Tamaki said, "I will join the Tax Council for Social Security discussions," and it suggests that he will be a little bit more leaning towards. So he's looking for some benefits of doing that, and also cooperating with the Prime Minister so that she looks a little bit better in Washington, D.C., and also has more confidence in passing the budget in the upper house. So the Democratic Party for the People has a significant number, not quite enough to breach 51% for the LDP, Ishin, and the Democratic Party for the People to have 51%. I think they need 3, maybe 4 more votes. I think they'll be able to scrape that through. And as most of us know, constitutionally, the diet passes the budget from the lower house, it goes to the upper house, and the upper house can accept it or reject it or accept it with conditions and pass it back down to the lower house. The lower house can say, forget it. We have a supermajority or we have a majority, and we override that. The prime minister is going to great lengths to avoid that. She doesn't want to have that kind of confrontation. She doesn't want to appear to the public to be ramming things through. So you can see a lot of the steps that she's taking now. Some people in the audience might say, why doesn't she just exercise her power and bulldoze through? She can do that easily, and she's not. She's spending political capital in maintaining that. So it's a very clever, I think, a very astute move. Watch it in a lot of different areas. She is tough when it counts to be tough. She is punishing people who go against her, even in her own party. But that's beginning to diminish because people understand, what's at stake with them maintaining. So there is no election. The next election is supposed to be for the upper house, but we've got another 2 years before that happens. So although the LDP has a firm control of the lower house, and that won't change unless there is another election or a controversy, or it just doesn't look. They will have their full term this time. The next election will be in the upper house, and the drive here is to secure a supermajority in the upper house too. When that happens, I get questions all the time. A lot of the meetings that I attend with other people who are involved in my line of work, government affairs and public policy, the revision of the Constitution always comes up. So now she's going to revise the Constitution, right? She has a supermajority. It's a lot more complicated than that, but yes, the winds are blowing. That's what that was one of the concepts of the LDP in the beginning, to reform the Constitution, to revise it. There are a couple of things that need to be updated, and there are a couple of things that were inserted into the Constitution that just don't sit right with most Japanese people, or with the LDP, you can certainly say. And those need to be addressed. They've needed to be addressed for a long time. So that will happen once the LDP has a chance to fix the numbers in the upper house. Just as an aside, to change the Constitution, it requires 2/3 of a vote in the upper house and the lower house to pass a provision to change the Constitution. Then it goes to a vote for the Japanese people. If 51% of the people who vote, so it's not 51% of the population, of those people who vote, if it's a bad day, if it snows, if it rains, and fewer people, 51% of the people who vote say yes, then the Constitution is revised accordingly. So it can happen in a very brief period of time. I imagine if there's some sort of a critical incident or some sort of kinetic activity, it might happen very quickly. It can happen in the span of 3 or 4 weeks, actually. That's not on the radar right now, but I just wanted to tune you up on that. So the diet sprint is, we are right in the middle of it. Friday, the prime minister has committed to passing the budget up to the upper house. And that's consists of 58 hours. This is incredible. There has never been less than, I think Mr. Abe had it and Mr. Koizumi had a brief one too. But I think the next shortest one was 66 hours. And that was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So 58 hours of debate. It's a real rush. And the prime minister has been advised, why don't you stretch it out? Why don't we have a supplemental budget so that the debates can go on longer? They can go into April 15th, give the diet another maybe 2 weeks to debate it and to hammer it out. And she said, no, I'm sticking to my guns. And this shows, grit and resolve and an ability to kind of grab the moment. And I think it's not just this issue. It is not just the budget issue. I think it goes across the board. She is really a fireball. And you're going to see that in how tax policy comes out, how the yen and the bond market is handled, her relationship with the Bank of Japan and the chairman, Mr. Ueda. So things to watch right now are what's happening this next Friday, and then we'll meet again next Sunday. But the next one will be what's going on in Washington, D.C. And when she comes back, how does that go? So um, those are the things to watch out for right now. And if she comes back from Washington, D.C. with a garland or a feather in her cap, she will have established her footing as the premier power holder in Nagata-cho in Japanese politics, and that one will take her for a long way. That will take her for a good couple of years and maybe another LDP presidency. So let's see. Let's move on to the economy and the yen and the markets. There's a very tight interaction between the currency, the bond market, and the Bank of Japan. And the yen has been drifting weaker, as you might expect, over this last week. It was at 152 this time last week, and that was Iran was attacked on Saturday. We reported on it here. The markets opened up on Monday, so when we were talking the last time, the yen was at about 152. It's in the 155 range, almost 156. So that means it's weakening. And when it weakens, that means that the cost that Japan must pay for example, energy increases. And it's like in any economy, the energy cost affects everybody. It affects, how you're transporting foodstuffs from the dock to the supermarkets, how you're refrigerating things. And in particular for Japan, since they must rely on foreign energy sources, the fact that the Strait of Hormuz, which constricts or flows 90% of Japan's imported oil, if that closes, it actually has closed and it's being open now, but even being restricted, it does impact the yen almost immediately, and that begins to tumble down, and it impacts food costs. It impacts the inputs to production, which are mostly foreign, and then it impacts inflation. So Japan is particularly sensitive, as we know, to this dynamic because the country imports the overwhelmingly majority of its foodstuffs and its energy from abroad, and that's paid in U.S. dollars. So at the same time, the Bank of Japan is under trying to get away from the ultra-loose money policy that has guided Japanese politics for 15, 20 years, a favorite of Prime Minister Abe, deceased Prime Minister Abe. But the interest rates have risen about 0.75%, and this is the highest level in decades. So the bond markets reflect this kind of transition, and so bond markets, the way it flows, it's reflected somewhat in the yen and the power of the yen or the price of the yen. Bond markets reflect it pretty quickly because they predict how things are going to be happening in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then it hits the stock market in a kind of a stair-step kind of fashion. So the 10-year government bond yields moved above 2%. That's signaling to investors to expect further normalization of rates over time. So that's stabilizing things. The stock market continues to perform very strongly in spite of what's going on in the Middle East. The Nikkei remains in record territory after an extraordinary rally in the past year, supported by corporate reform, strong earnings, and renewed global investor interest in Japan. And you see the same thing in the United States too. The stock market is really going crazy there in spite of a lot of the controversy, a lot of the things that the Trump administration is doing, some of the controversy there. But there are things that are going on that make you think there's something bigger going on here. I don't quite understand the picture. Why is that thing going? So for us here in Japan, the three things to watch are the yen, follow the yen, the fluctuation of the yen, follow the bond market as a barometer of what's going to happen in the near term, and then just watch what's going on with the tone of what the Bank of Japan is saying. I think the relationship between the Bank of Japan and the Prime Minister, Kante, the central government, is becoming a little bit more meshed. They're trying to project themselves as being independent. We are independent, although the chairman is appointed by the prime minister. Mr. Ueda was appointed by Mr. Kishida, and his term ends in, I think, a year and a half or 2 years. But that they attempt to be independent, but I think the relationship there is becoming a little bit more intertwined, if I can say that. So moving on to Iran and Japan. The Israeli strikes and the United States strikes have really decimated what's going on inside Iran. And Iran is trying to extract itself by closing the Strait of Hormuz, as everybody has been following. And it looks like that might not hold. It looks like the United States is going to be escorting these tankers, paying or subsidizing some of the insurance rates to keep that going. That's good news for Japan. It's good news for Korea. It's good news for those countries that are favorable to the United States, not so much for North Korea or for China. And I think that's part of the game that we're in right now. The disruption immediately affects energy prices, obviously. And so how long this goes, and you listen to press reports, they're always quizzing the president or Pete Hegseth or anybody that they can get, how long is this going to go? Is this going to be months or years, or how many weeks is this going? And they're tapping it down. They're saying it's going to be very brief. It's going to be very shallow. The impact is not going to be very heavy. So the United States needs to wrap this up because the global markets can't really stomach a shock to the system that global energy prices skyrocket. And it doesn't look like it's going to happen that way. In the meantime, the Japanese government is evacuating all of the people, all the Japanese nationals. There are about 200 that live and work in Iran. I think they've already exited the country, and they're in neighboring countries now. And the self-defense forces are flying people back, obviously for free. Get your suitcases, get your kids, bundle up, and come back to Japan, or safe harbor someplace else. But they're taking care of that. But I'm not sure exactly how many Japanese nationals there are in that region, because that would include lots of areas that are being impacted. They're being bombed. They're being strafed by Iranian missiles and armaments. So it could be that people are just hunkering down, going to a safe spot and waiting for things to cool down. But in this kind of a conflict, it usually takes months before things settle down. So we'll see. But Japan has, in the meantime, about 200 days of petroleum reserves. It provides a bit of a buffer, but it doesn't really eliminate the vulnerability. And as we know, all of the Japan hands that are in on this briefing, Japan hates that kind of vulnerability. They don't like to have that kind of insecurity, that kind of inability to predict what's going to be happening. So if the energy prices spike quickly, it will hit the inflation, it'll hit the bond markets, and then it will filter into the yen. So I think this will be one of the main issues of discussion between President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi in what 14, 15 days, something like that. So um, I mentioned when we were opening the briefing that China has resumed kind of aggressive uh, cat and mouse games in the air and on the seas, just starting on Saturday. So for maybe 3 weeks now, they have been backing off, and it's very curious that they were very aggressively testing the boundaries, and then they suddenly backed off, and we noticed that. I think a lot of people noticed that it was being reduced for whatever reason. There were some changes in the Politburo of China, and a lot of the military were removed from command. This happened maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. It might be as a consequence of that. We're not quite sure, but there still remain tensions in the Indo-Pacific. China is now resuming aggressive air operations through the straits, and it's reinforcing pressure on this region. And it's interesting that the foreign minister of Taiwan went on a long interview just this last week. He wants Taiwan to be included in the first island chain of defense should there be an action by China to regain Taiwan. There's a lot going on there now, geopolitically, and it's so interesting. We mentioned about the World Baseball Classic. It started, I think, on Thursday. There was a game last night. There was a game, I think, Friday and Saturday night as well. The game, I think last night, or I think it was last night, was between Japan and Taiwan. And the Taiwanese premier visited Japan in his personal capacity to see the game. So he joined. A couple of the administrators of Taiwan also came. And this is, I mean, the premier of Taiwan hasn't officially visited Japan since, I think, 1972. So that's when Japan broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And they, like the United States, they didn't recognize Taiwan as an independent country with its own ability to govern itself. And people just kind of turn a blind eye there. And I think that was to placate China, to tap things down. That was a long time ago. But now he shows up in Japan. So let's wait and see what the Chinese have to say about that. I'm sure they will go explosive. But among the visitors to the Conte to see the prime minister, he wasn't on the list. So he and his delegation made it very clear that they were here in their personal capacity to watch Taiwan play Japan. Shohei Ohtani was at bat. He knocked out a home run, a grand slam home run, bases loaded. He knocked it out of the park, and the crowd went absolutely crazy. Japan, at the score in the seventh inning, was 13-0 against Taiwan. And under the rules, it's called a mercy rule. They ended that particular game just because it didn't look like Taiwan was going to be much on the scoreboard, and it was pretty obviously who was going to win. So that's a pretty interesting insight. There are moves. The speech by the foreign minister just this last week about Japan and Taiwan cooperating. There was an 11 billion military aid package signed by President Trump just 2 weeks ago for Taiwan. This is amazing. And then the premier visits Japan. So there's a lot going on here. You move the game forward in incremental changes, and I think this one, if you're China, you could be terribly offended by it. I'm sure they will be, but it's an incremental change, and you're trying to kind of move that ball forward, and you can see that happening in real time. But once again, you can miss it too if you're not paying that much attention. So there's a lot to watch. There's a lot going on in Okinawa. There was this joint exercise with with Philippines, Japan, Australia, the United States. This last maybe 2 weeks ago, military exercises to practice air and sea dominance in that region. Exercises going on there. So the United States is committed. South Korea is a big part of that. I still don't have a date on the South Korean visit by the prime minister. She said she was going to go. I had predicted that she would go before Washington, D.C., and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. She's going to be in Washington, D.C. in 15 days, 14 days, and passing the budget to the lower house. She has that 1 week before she goes to Washington, D.C., that she could possibly squeeze it in. But she is committed to shuttle diplomacy with South Korea. So that kind of encircling chain of islands, South Korea, Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines, and now potentially Taiwan being in that circle of like-minded countries to defend against a potential Chinese incursion. The restriction of oil to China, potentially to North Korea as well. It looks like there's a lot going on geopolitically that we just need to keep our eye on. North Korea has been quiet, but they continue expanding their missile and submarine capabilities. So it's something to be aware of. And as you remember, Russia just pointed out 2 weeks ago, it is somewhat curious to us that there are no peace discussions going on between Russia and Japan. We still are at basically a state of war. We have never signed a peace treaty ending hostilities of World War II. Japan insists that we return these 4 islands, these northern territories, up beyond Hokkaido. There are 4 islands that we invaded and we took when just as soon as the bomb was dropped. We moved in there. And we're not going to return those islands, but we still want to sign a peace treaty. And Japan has said, no way, we're not going to return the islands. There are islands. You invaded them when just as soon as we had a peace treaty, and you broke the peace treaty as soon as the bomb was dropped on us. So we don't like you. We don't trust you. If you want to have a peace treaty with us, return the islands, and that's going nowhere. Prime Minister Abe tried 22 visits with Putin to try and resolve that issue. He made no progress there. So I think probably the prime minister and the foreign ministry has pretty much relegated that to as a good place to waste time. So they're not responding to it. So let's see, what else do we have? As you can see, there are like many multiple strategic developments occurring simultaneously throughout the Middle East. Instability affecting the energy and the rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait, North Korea and Russia, the cascade of diplomatic engagements of major powers. President Trump is scheduled to visit China at the end of March. So that's been moved up. I don't have a confirmation on the date. I thought it was going to be early in April. It looks like it's going to be in March now. So March 19th is visit with Prime Minister Takaichi, and within 2 weeks, if this projection is accurate, within 2 weeks he'll be in China. So the diplomatic calendar itself just reflects a moment of global recalibration. It's something to watch very carefully. So I think Japan right now, it's interesting. They're experiencing the baseball World Classic. The stadiums are full. It's just a really happy time for Japanese love baseball, and the Japanese team is doing extremely well. This is a World Classic. It involves countries providing their baseball teams. Taiwan, interestingly enough, Japan is in Block C, and Taiwan is in that block, and they beat Taiwan last night 13-0. Taiwan's entry replaced China's entry. So last year, China was in Block C. They were replaced by Taiwan. So that's an interesting, another evolution here. The other thing that's going on is in 100 days, the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, will take place across 3 nations. It's the first time for it to span 3 nations. It will be in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And there's a lot going on in these 3 countries over these last 2 or 3 months. The visit of the Prime Minister from Canada is somewhat meaningful in that regard. China, I'm sorry, not China, but the games being played in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, 104 games will be played over a span of a couple of weeks, and they're in the hot spots. Not so much Canada. There are not riots and there's not a whole lot of controversy in Canada, but in Mexico there is, and in the United States, though, some games will be played in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in New York City. So the possibility for riots, for protests, for people, and it's in 100 days. So it has time to metastasize into something a little bit more dramatic. And what I'm trying to point out here is the contrast between world the World Classic Baseball here in Japan and what we're going to anticipate from soccer. And soccer is just more volatile anyway. The contrast there, I think, is something that we need to watch out for. The protests and the demonstrations are anticipated, and the mood here in Japan is just completely different. And Japan's such a unique place. It's a place we all love. It's got its own issues, but they're quirky and they're impactful on us living here and doing business in Japan, representing itself and doing business elsewhere too. So I'd like to wrap up this overview, and we find ourselves in a moment where multiple forces are moving simultaneously. The Diet is approaching a critical budget vote. The Prime Minister is preparing for a high-stakes visit to Washington. Energy markets are reacting to the Middle East tensions. Regional security dynamics continue to evolve, and the financial markets are watching Japan's economic transition very carefully. If you want to track the trajectory of events in upcoming weeks, we'll keep an eye on the four signs that are really kind of guideposts for us. That's the yen, oil prices. What happens on March 13th? That budget should go to the upper house. We anticipate it going to be done like that. What happens on March 19th? Beyond that, so depending on how the Prime Minister does on March 19th in Washington, D.C., will project what's going to happen at the end of the month with the upper house passing the budget, hopefully, and it becoming a bill. And then we move into the new budget session on April 1st, as it's supposed to happen. Japan is no longer just a quiet place, and neither is the world that we're living in right now. We are in a moment of incredible flux and change, and we're very glad, very honored that you join us on Sundays to get a tune-up of what's going on, and also contribute to us, helping us understand the dynamics better with your questions and comments that you feed to Maya throughout the presentation. So if I went a little bit long, I apologize. Let's get right to the meat and bones of this briefing, the Q&A session, Maya. Thank you very much, people, for giving me your time.
Thank you, Timothy. And forgive me for this. Yes, we're moving to the Q&A session. Again, before we start with the questions, please remember to let us know that you have been here. Share your questions, your comments, your thoughts about the topics we talk about. Also, please keep in mind that these are briefings about Japan and Japanese politics, and of course, events that impact them. So, even if you are curious about commentary on events that do not impact Japan, we are not going to talk about them. So apologies for this, but that's how it is.
You're so active, Maya. I'm sure while I'm doing my briefing, you've got 2 or 3 screens on your desktop, and you got lots of stuff going on there. So
Yes,
thank you very much for what you do.
Well, you're welcome. I cannot not do it. All right. And yes, today we are going to start with the very first questions that came this morning from, of course, Byron, our regular viewer. And the first question from him is, there appears to be infighting within Ishin about the referendum needed to make Osaka the second capital of Japan between former Osaka mayor Matsui and current Osaka governor and national co-leader Yoshimura. Is it on who will get credit for the success of that core Ishin plank, or are there more structural differences on how the future Osaka will look? Which is it?
Yeah, I think it's both. There's a lot going on between the LDP and Ishin. Mm-hmm. And Ishin, in order to be joined to the LDP, would like to have some benefits for that and some guarantees, but it doesn't have the muscle that it used to have. But the LDP did promise that if you have your ducks in a row, we will identify Osaka as the secondary capital. But it can't be the secondary capital until it becomes a metropolis like Tokyo. So, yes, who gets the credit for succeeding in that? It's a long process. This is the third time that Osaka will try to merge the Osaka prefectural government and the city government into one unit. um, but also, Ishin, who dominates in Osaka politics, they also had a demand that we reduce the number of seats in the parliament by 10%. That's about 50 members in the lower house. Let's reduce that. They got a kind of a, okay, we can do that before Ms. Takaichi had the election. You might remember she became prime minister. The LDP was really sucking wind. They needed Ishin, they needed Komeito, they lost Komeito. And so Ishin was able to extract some promises. One of the promises was, number one, make Osaka the secondary capital. Number two was reduce the number of diet seats by 10%. Before we closed out the year, the idea became not reducing by 10%, but the split was between the district seats and the proportional representation seats. Ishin wants all of those reductions to be in proportional representation because that hurts Komeito the most and it benefits Ishin the most. And they couldn't get that to go, so they said, we'll have 25 in the representation seats reduced and 20 in the proportional. And it's not what they wanted, but they'll take it. But that died once we had the election. But once again, to Takaichi's credit, she has agreed to push that bill forward. She's agreed to push the Osaka metropolitan government bill forward. So she hasn't said no to that. So it's really critically important that the referendum pass to make it a metropolis. And now, yes, there's just so much going on. The current governor, he ran and he was elected on the same day as the landslide election for the lower house by the LDP. Same day, he became governor once again. There are people that say he has national aspirations to become prime minister by leaping from the governorship, and he's still young. He's doing a dramatic, dynamic job in Osaka. Into national politics, I kind of doubt it. I think he'll be a career governor of Osaka. But Osaka is really starting to come together. They're being a little bit more delicate in their handling with the LDP. The LDP doesn't need them that much. So they're getting what they can and being cooperative. And the Democratic Party for the People is watching this and saying, we want some of that action too. We shouldn't be part of the opposition. Nobody wants to be part of the opposition. The opposition holds, the largest opposition party holds only 10% of the seats in the lower house. It's nothing. It's a fly that's bothering you while you're trying to go to sleep.
Okay, thank you for this. And the second question is a question that is coinciding, let's say, or is very similar to a question I have or had before reading this one. And it is former Nikkei faction members met under the leadership of Mr. Nikkei and established a research group to work together on lawmaker-initiated legislation. Former MIC Minister Takeda Ryota was elected chair. Is this the beginning of a reconstruction of the old factions, albeit in a new format? What is the difference, if any, between a faction and a research group?
So I apologize because you ask me a question or Byron asks a question and I tumble into a long explanation, and I apologize about that because it's all
Right.
complicated and difficult. And yeah, I know you give me that eye mile, like, gosh, can you get to your period already? So yes, as briefly as I can, the faction system looks like it's coming back. And that's not to be judged negatively. This is a part of human nature, particularly in politics, that you want to be with like minded people. You want to be with people who hold views similar to you, or you want to be close to somebody who helped you get elected. And those groups come out as just a natural part of human nature. So we've been through a very difficult period where money was handled inappropriately and it was blamed on the LDP, one of the factions of the LDP that had a technique that was well honed over 25 years of doing this. And finally, the opposition parties got sick of it. Some of the factions who were not participating in that kind of tactic also wanted to level the field, and they wanted the huge beneficiary of it, the Abe faction, to be diminished. They were twice as large as the next largest faction. And as a consequence of that, under the Kishida administration, 2 administrations ago, the faction system was disbanded. And it started with the Abe faction. Then Mr. Kishida disbanded his faction, and everybody disbanded their factions except for the Aso faction. And I'm going long winded again, and I apologize. So the Nikai faction, yes, Mr. Nikai kind of showed up, but he is so old and aged. He's not a member of the parliament anymore. But his faction was one of the factions that disbanded, even though they were untainted by the Unification Church scandal. So the desire for them to regroup, they were punished because they were painted in the same paintbrush as the Abe faction and other people. It was kind of unfair. So one of their rising stars is Kobayashi, who is in the cabinet, who's young. He's from Chiba. He's doing a magnificent job in his area of responsibility. And I think he has aspirations of being a prime minister. In fact, I think the next prime ministerial race will, if there is a challenge to Takaichi, and there will be, when you have a race, you have to have contenders. It will consist of Takaichi, Kobayashi, and Koizumi. And maybe they will reduce it forcefully to 2 or 3 or 4 people, because this race to have so many candidates for prime minister is somewhat disruptive. So I think we're returning more to a more regular thing. So I think in just a few months, you will have the launch of the former Nikai faction under the leadership that you've identified. And then Abe faction is also coming together, but now they're tainted with this bad reputation. So it won't be called the Abe faction or the former Fukuda faction. I think it will have to be consisted of something altogether different. And just one other point, and I apologize, but Mr. Hagiuda was instrumental in bringing the premier of Taiwan to Japan for the baseball game. And Mr. Hagiuda was one of the top leaders of the Abe faction when it was collapsing. He didn't suffer as badly as some of the other leaders did. Some of them actually had to give up their diet seats. But he is beginning to reemerge. So it could be a Hagiuda faction against China and supporting Taiwan. This is the foundation of our group, our faction, and that would gel a lot of members together too. So in a couple of words, yes, I sense the faction is coming back. It's a natural consequence. The kind of weirdness that we have where all of the factions are disbanded is unstable and not something that will continue for a long period of time.
Right. And also, we know that Miss Takaichi, she was not a member of a faction, right? She was not a member of Mr. Abe's faction. So my follow-up question here is, do you think that when the factions come back under whatever name, because I don't believe that they will be called factions anymore, but do you think that she will become a member of one of them, or is she going to just maintain her, let's say, neutrality with regard to these formations within the LDP?
I think her faction is called, it's already established. And
Oh,
her
okay.
faction, yes, her faction is called the LDP.
Right. That's a good
And
one. Yeah.
if I was her, that's what I would stick with. She's
Mm-hmm.
got to, she's got a moniker that she's not joining a faction. She hasn't joined a faction. And I think
Right.
that suits her well. And I don't think that a change of circumstances will encourage her to join a faction or to launch a faction. She doesn't need to. Other people do need to. You know,
Mhm.
if you're going to grab the bull by the horns, if you want to have a ministerial portfolio, you have to have muscle. You have to have a hammer to kind of insist that you get that seat. And not this seat, I want this seat, the one that's higher, right? And everybody benefits. Everybody in your faction benefits. If you're a minister, they benefit through a lot of different ways that are mysterious and political. That's the way it happens. So having a faction provides stability and security, and that's what politicians want. They want to be above and beyond everything else. They want to be reelected. They want to continue this. It's a gravy train. I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but they want to continue that. They want to stay employed. They want to stay representing people because they don't want to go back to their regular job.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. And on YouTube, we've got Peter Pan, and he says, will Trump be going to China in April after attacking China's strategic partner? I think that you already mentioned that he is going to China in the end of March, right? So probably this is the answer to Peter Pan's question. And
So as I mentioned in the last briefing, Maya, Trump has announced that he's going to China in early April.
right,
China had not yet announced his arrival date or the confirmation of his visit,
okay,
right? And now I hear that he will be visiting China in March, but I haven't heard that China has accepted that. And yes, will he visit even though he's attacking one of China's allies or suppliers or main countries that it's supporting? Yes, of course. And in fact, many people mention, Trump is playing 3D chess while other people are playing checkers. Yes, this attack on Venezuela, the attack on Iran, all of these things, it's built up to have this negotiation with China. So you go with as many marbles as you can carry, and maybe you come back and you don't have as many marbles, but the marbles that you have are better than the ones that you went with.
right, okay. Thank you for that answer as well. And we've got a question from Hiroaki about Ms. Takaichi's visit to Washington. He says President Donald Trump and Ms. Sanae Takaichi summit in Washington. The question is about this. As media speculates, do you think that any military contribution deals of Boei Sho and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force will be held or will be discussed there, so
Yeah.
that, yes, in relation to stabilizing the Hormuz Strait.
Oh, in relation to stabilizing the Hormuz Strait,
Yes,
I didn't think
you
that's where
think
you were
that they
going
will
with
be
the question.
discussing? No,
They'll,
yes.
they'll
So
go ahead.
the question is whether Ms. Takaichi and Donald Trump will be discussing Japanese contribution to the stabilization of the Hormuz Strait.
Um, yeah, he's going to be asking for a contribution. We are protecting the straits. We are escorting tankers. We are paying subsidies for the insurance rates just in case. And that money's coming out of the United States, and we would like you to contribute to that. Thank you very much. More, I think more pregnantly, if I can say it like that, is will you join the Board of Peace? Which is, there's a membership fee. You pony up. She hasn't been invited. Well, she's probably been invited. She hasn't attended any of the foundational meetings of the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace is potentially a replacement for NATO, for what's going on in the EU. I think Donald Trump is just sick of what's going on in the EU and has just completely bypassed them. He sees them as ineffective. In fact, the UN as well. So, Board of Peace is his idea for filling that vacuum. And yeah, I think she will definitely be asked for that. It sounds
Mm,
like a lot. $550 billion you invest in our country. Those investments, they produce a revenue stream. We get the lion's share of that revenue. You get some of it too. You benefit downstream. So that's the way that one goes. So there are a lot of demands, it seems like, from the United States on Japan. Pay more than 2%. 2%, thank you very much. You did your 5 year plan. You reduced it to 4 years, the same amount of money spent over 4 years. But 2% isn't going to cut it. You need to go to 3%. And they haven't said that. I mean, even the current ambassador to Japan mentioned that in his confirmation hearings. Japan needs to spend 5% or 4%. It needs, in any event, 2% is not quite enough. And I think that issue will come up. But I think the reality is that, yeah, it's probably something that's somewhat reasonable. Japan, if the United States is not going to be ponying up as it once had, and if Japan is going to be building more lethal weapons for export, it needs to be doing a little bit more in terms of filling the gap that the United States had been filling very happily. The United States was happy to do that, the world policeman, but that's not the gig anymore.
right. All right. Moving on to the next question. So, from Aloha Aposto on YouTube, we've got. Okay, so do you think that Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi will be dictating any Japan needs, or maybe he needs discussing any Japanese needs with Trump, any
Oh,
needs of
sure.
Japan? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. um, that could be technology transfer. It could be a reduction of payments of a certain order to certain industries. Um, yeah, it could be a reduction of tariffs in certain areas. Um, I think, yes, she will make some commitments. She'll be asked to make some commitments. Board of Peace, potentially. Also, subsidizing some of the Strait of Hormuz protection areas. But I think she will come back, like I said, with a wreath on her head as a victor. She needs to do that, and I think Trump understands she needs to do that. She's in a delicate position until she passes the budget in the upper house, and when she does that, and when she comes back from her visit with Trump, and then Trump goes to China, and then we figure out what the Trump Z dynamic is and what kind of a deal they've created there, then we'll know. We'll know how big her home run hit was. But the Japanese, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is very worried that Japan is going to be a pawn that's sacrificed so that the United States gets the best deal for the United States at the cost or at the demerit of Japan. So people are sitting on pins and needles waiting for that. They don't know quite what's going to happen, but they understand that it's Donald Trump, so you just never know.
I also wonder because obviously the Supreme Court in the United States ruled that the tariffs were illegal. And so basically, the question is, of course, how the Trump administration continues applying them or not applying them, whether they are going to come up with something new. But also because that's a ruling of the Supreme Court, do you think that this gives the other non-American negotiating side some leverage in the continuing negotiations, because we know that the negotiations, for example, between Japan and the United States are still going on. And does it give Japan any leverage in these negotiations, or is it just what it is? And because it's President Trump, nobody's going to be able to do anything.
Maya, I know you like cats, so I hope you're not offended, but I think from Donald Trump's perspective, there are lots of ways to skin a cat. You
Mm,
know,
mm-hmm.
I want to do this, and you're not going to let me do it this way. I'll do it the other way. So I think, he's already imposed the tariff. He's already collected the funds in some amounts, in some um, context. So if the Supreme Court says you're not supposed to do it that way, what do you do? Do you return the money? Do you cajole the people that gave you the money? Why don't you write me a letter that says we gave you that money in good faith and you can keep it. And under the new regime of the tariffs, you have benefited us by reducing it a little bit to compensate for it. So there are lots of ways. Even though the cat is screaming, you're still going to be able to skin it. And I think that describes Donald Trump. He's still going to do
Oh,
what he wants to do.
okay. Well, moving back to the Middle East conflict and its impact on Japan, we've got Agnieszka. She's Agnieszka. Hello, thank you very much for tuning in again. She says, "Can you please elaborate a bit more about how the maritime transport might be influenced by the current events, if you have thoughts on it? Thank you." With regard to, yes, I believe this is to the Middle East conflict.
This is maritime. This is Strait of Hormuz and the Malacca Straits and
I believe that
shipping
is,
to Japan.
yes, yes, yes. It's
And
strict
and
about politics, not strictly about politics, but still it is related to politics. Yes.
can you believe, Maya? Somebody said, "Can you elaborate?" Like I need the invitation.
I'm
So
I'm happy to hear that you're very self-aware.
thank you. Well, after the briefing, I hear enough about it. So,
Right. Yes. You
but
cannot
with
not
regard
be.
to yes, with regard to this particular question, I don't have much to add on that other than what I've said. The United States is really full bore on protecting and ensuring that the flow is frequent and unhindered. And yes, people will have to pay for it. It's a lot. It's a lot to depend on. But I think the United States is just going to move in to that region and pretty much dominate and police it. And therefore, it can control where the oil is going to flow to. And if we don't want it to go to China, then we don't let it go to China. And I think that's the choke point that the United States is moving into. So they're going to guard it and protect it as if it was a primary asset. And they're in a position to exercise that if they so choose. But let's see how it happens. But yes, I think the United States will protect the flow of oil to Japan. It's just, at what cost? The United States wants to control that flow. That pretty much explains what happened in Venezuela. And so you've got Venezuela, you've got the Strait of Hormuz. You're sitting pretty if you can control those two sources.
Right. Okay. And then from Percival, thank you very much for joining us on YouTube. It is, what do you think the position of Japan will be now with the recent broke up war in the Middle East? Can Japan stay neutral or take sides? It seems it is an odd situation from what I heard from the TV news.
Yes,
So,
yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Japan, and that's why the visit from Canada was timely. Canada wants to be. Canada is a kind of middle country. It's not one of the dominant ones. It's a player, not a major player, but it would like to be involved in discussions. It would like its voice to be heard, and it would like to project some weight geopolitically. And Japan's in a similar situation. Uh, ju- but just Canada is totally dominated by the United States. Japan's in a different situation, and the United States wants Japan to take more of a role, have more of a leadership role in the Asia Pacific. I mean, compared to everybody else, except for China, compared to everybody else, it's so dominant. It makes so much money. It has such a keen geopolitical location and stance right in the trade valley there. But also militarily, it's in a very delicate place, and I think Japan wants to keep it at the negotiating level. So let's not go kinetic. Let's not build up our forces. But if we do build up our forces, please buy our weaponry. So it's delicate, right? Um,
right.
Canada wants to be somewhat neutral. It wants to be neutral. I can't say somewhat. It wants to be neutral. And Japan, although it's had a neutral stance ever since the end of World War II, I think it's moving in a direction where that becomes a little bit untenable. To be by force, you're going to be adroit in managing and maneuvering in that situation. And I think Japan is coming to the conclusion that it needs to be adroit and maneuverable. And that means it needs to change the Constitution. It needs to change the self-defense forces into a real army. And it needs to be able to build and export arms for its own protection and for its own projection, but also for the export market. And I think it's probably a 10-year plan, but I think that's the direction we appear to be going.
Right. Okay. And then somebody on YouTube with a handle name Thousand Mile Journey. Thank you very much for your question, but we're
A
not
lot of
going
new
to.
commentators.
Yes, forgive me, but I think that your comment, and requests do not have currently any impact on the discussion. So maybe we can have, we can answer other questions that are closely related to Japan. And then, once again, a question on LinkedIn from Nicholas Hansmark. The question is, do you have any thoughts on the Japan Self-Defense Forces recruitment of additional manpower?
Yeah.
And could Japan consider conscription? Assuming this also means assuming legal changes. Timothy.
That's a good question. So the most recent reports from the Japan Self-Defense Forces, they have never been able to meet their recruitment targets. And right now they're trying to recruit aviators, female aviators, which you would think would be an attractive option for females. They're not getting those numbers either. In the United States, in Israel, there are a lot of female fighter pilots, not just fighter pilots, but just, aviators. And I think it's an attractive and exciting and dynamic kind of career path. But I don't see that happening in Japan, and I don't see conscription either. I mean, they just don't have that culture. That ethos has been drilled out of them. I mean, Japanese mothers don't raise their kids to be like that anymore. And it's been going on for generations. It's been going on for more than 70 years. Pre-war, yes, there was honor the emperor, devote yourself to, your heritage and honor your elders. And that's not a part of the current education mix. So were something like that to happen, if it were to happen, there are a lot of structural changes that need to be made in the education system, in the spirituality of Japan, in the pride that Japan has of being Japanese. There is pride there, but for example, in the self-defense forces, there's no, you don't feel that sense of honor and pride in being a member of the self-defense forces. They go to work in their civilian clothes, they get on campus, and they change into their uniforms. And once they leave the campus, they change into their civilian uniforms. You never see self-defense forces out in the public, except in disaster areas or on rare occasions. But you don't see them on the streets. You don't see them on the trains. So that sort of thing, to change something like that, takes a long time. And the first thing you have to do is you have to give it the respect that it deserves of being an army and not a self-defense forces without any teeth, without any ability to project, or to develop that kind of a really gleaming, prideful career path. It's not quite there. And I hate to sound pejorative or negative about it, but I think it's, to move into conscription. Oh, gosh, Maya, can you imagine that happening?
Well, I cannot, and I do hope that they don't move into that direction either, because, it puts Japan into an entirely new, let's say, environment, right?
Oh, it would change the culture completely.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And then Nicholas says the Crown Princess of Sweden is qualifying as a fighter pilot on the JAS 39 now. So yes, obviously in other countries that is the situation, but as Timothy mentioned, for 70 years, the population, every next generation has not been raised in that way. Yes, and yes, Hiroaki says, not anymore in current educational system, in Monbuka Gakusho, or yes, mixed, that's true too, indeed. Okay, and well, thank you to everybody who commented, and again, apologies to for not answering questions and comments that do not have impact on Japanese politics. And because these are about, I mean, our briefings are about Japanese politics and events here.
I cannot imagine the wrestling, the digital wrestling you're doing while the show is going on, Maya.
I'm sorry for this. Yes, I'm trying to multitask, listening to you and reading comments and saving them as well, screening them. Yeah, so sometimes I may make these strange faces. Apologies for them, but that's
Sometimes.
right. Okay. Anyway, so thank you very much to everybody who was with us, and we appreciate your time. And of course, if you find these briefings informative, please share them. Help us spread the word. Well, we're doing them free of charge. We do not intend to charge anybody in the future either. And also, if you have questions that come up during the week, share them on the social media you use, and we will address them
Yeah.
as soon as possible during the next briefing. And remember that we have a synopsis. It goes out via the newsletter of Langley Esquire, and it is also published on Substack, and it is also published on Langley Esquire's website. Every week you'll find them there. Anything else? If you have questions, do not hesitate to DM, to send us direct messages, and we'll be happy to connect. Timothy, anything else?
Yes, and also, I already asked if you would hit like. I don't know if you got much of a reaction off of that, Maya. But also, just being friendly and linking up on LinkedIn is always kind of nice too. Um, Send a LinkedIn invite to either me or Maya or both of us. And if you're more interested on the personal level, maybe seek out Facebook, which doesn't have the professional stuff, but more of the stuff about sailing and my life and what I'm doing and what I'm eating and things like that. It doesn't appeal to everybody, but if you're curious, because a lot of people are curious, how the hell did you get into this? How did you get into Japanese politics? You don't look very Japanese, and so it's I don't generally talk about that, but if you're interested, it's on the Facebook page, not on the LinkedIn page.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much to everybody watching us or who will be watching. Have a great Sunday and also a bright new week. And I hope that you have productive days and that you enjoy what you're doing as well. See you next Sunday, right? 8:20 Japan time.
Next Sunday, Japan time, the budget will be in the upper house then.
It will be. See you then.